Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1983 science fiction schlock that is Prisoners of the Lost Universe. And in this movie we meet Carrie Madison. Carrie is the Los Angeles-based host of a lightweight TV show that focuses on oddball people with wild stories. Her latest lead sounds like a great one, a certain Dr. Hartman who claims to be able to transport matter into another dimension, then back again. Carrie doesn't really care whether this is true or not, it's just good TV for what she does. However, her efforts to meet Dr. Hartman don't go smoothly. An earthquake strikes as she navigates the narrow road to his home, and while she is unhurt and it's not that serious an earth tremor, it does lead to her having a car accident with electrician and kendo enthusiast Dan Roebuck. After Carrie and Dan have squabbled like children over the accident, the former heads on to Dr. Hartman's home, where he demonstrates his invention for her. And impressively enough, it actually seems to work. You can imagine Carrie is pretty excited about this, or at least she is right up until the moment that a secondary earth tremor strikes, toppling the scientist through his own device, and he vanishes. Now, Carrie has no idea how to operate the machine and get Hartman back, and nor for that matter does Dan Roebuck, of course. He's an electrician, not a high-tech scientist. But when he fortuitously happens by the house in search of a telephone, because he hasn't been able to get his car running, that doesn't stop him from trying to fiddle with the machine. Surprise, surprise, his efforts go awry, and Dan also vanishes. For some reason, primarily because the plot wouldn't happen otherwise, or at least that's my suspicion, Carrie decides that the best approach to solving this problem is to also go through the gateway. She emerges into a whole different place, and to her surprise, there's no sign of either Hartman or Dan. There are, however, plenty of dangers in this realm, as she soon learns. Finding the missing men remains important, but she's going to have to work hard just to stay alive first. So, initially made for Showtime, Prisoners of the Lost Universe is a low-budget science fantasy film. Its most recognisable cast members are Richard Hatch and John Saxon. The former is best known for playing Apollo on Battlestar Galactica, and he features as the impulsive and hard-headed, in all senses of the word, Dan Roebuck, while Saxon, who may be best remembered for being the guy who is not Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, clearly seems to have enjoyed the opportunity to play the ruthless warlord with whom the three Earthlings will ultimately tangle. Now, this is not a good film on pretty much any metric, and there are some problematic aspects to the production itself. More on that in a moment. But I have a soft spot for the film despite its nonsensical script, unfunny cartoonish attempts at slapstick humour, obvious wall-to-wall cheapness, and regrettable choice of filming location. So, let's dig into that last point first, and then talk about why I still kind of like the movie anyway. So Prisoners of the Lost Universe was filmed in South Africa during the apartheid era. The choice of location presumably had some advantages in depicting a landscape that would have been unfamiliar to most Western audiences, but I suspect that the financial benefits were probably the primary motivator for the choice. South African labour costs would have been low, and the authorities at the time were likely eager to provide incentives for any foreign investment, even a cheapy made-for-TV science fiction movie. Now, it's important to recall that while an Olympic boycott had been in place against South Africa for some time in 1983, and most African nations had placed trade sanctions against the country, wider economic sanctions were being strongly resisted by the government of the United States and the United Kingdom, and would continue to do so for another year or two after this. Geopolitics probably played some part in that. South Africa was a strongly anti-communist state, but financial considerations were also key. Major companies from both nations were heavily invested in South Africa. Now, the film's filming location doesn't have much impact on the on-screen product, except in terms of, some secondary performers and their accents. But I think it's worth mentioning because the choice of where to film it, making that choice did ultimately help support an oppressive racist regime. Now, for me personally, I've kind of come to the decision that I'm okay with watching the movie today because that regime has been gone for 30 years. But I definitely understand it may be a deal breaker for some others, particularly those who are much more personally impacted by the apartheid regime's discriminatory policies and use of systemic violence to maintain itself. So that's why I wanted to mention this aspect of the film before any other aspect of the movie. Right, so If you're a fantasy fan of a certain age, particularly if you come from a Commonwealth nation, there's a good chance you have fond childhood memories of the ultra-low budget, ultra-cheesy 1980 film Hawk the Slayer, in which a bunch of British television actors try to take down a scenery-chewing Jack Palance by virtue of a magic sword and some of the most comical special effects ever committed to screen. We're talking literal use of silly string as a binding spell and fluorescent superballs as a stand-in for firebolts. Now, in Hawk the Slayer, the hero joins forces with an elf, a dwarf, and a giant in order to defeat the evil warlord Vultan. In Prisoners of the Lost Universe, the hero joins forces with a green man, a dwarf, and an ogre to defeat the evil warlord Creel. So, just in case the parallels there weren't obvious enough, the Green Man and the Dwarf are played by the same actors who portrayed the Elf and the Dwarf in Hawk the Slayer. I suspect the only reason they didn't get Bernard Bresslaw back to play the Ogre was he was too busy playing the Cyclops in Krull. There are plenty of other plot beats to the film that should feel familiar to fans of Hawk the Slayer too. Terry Marcel, who wrote and directed both films, is clearly a big fan of recycling. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that if you ever spent time on a playground pretending to wield the Mind Sword or to shoot a bow with machine gun-like speed due to the miracle of looped film footage, then there is every chance this movie will give you the same gleefully silly, fuzzy feelings that it does me. I mean, Marcel even recycles that use of looped film footage in this movie. Like, this is the kind of level of parallels between the two films. But Prisoners of the Lost Universe doesn't just steal from Hawk the Slayer. Now, the A-Team TV show had hit television screens at the beginning of 1983, and the show's combination of goofy, over-the-top characters, goofy, over-the-top schemes, and extremely sanitized, bloodless action proved an instant smash hit. Terry Marcel appears to have, intentionally or otherwise, appropriated pretty much the entire formula for the film's climactic action sequence. The only thing that's missing is a preparatory montage over a stirring, jaunty theme tune. Now, for full disclosure, I'm certainly not the first person to notice the A-Team-esque tone of the film's finale. In fact, I first saw the connection made on the excellent website 1000 Misspent Hours. But as that site's creator puts it, once you spot how Prisoners of the Lost Universe is doing an A-Team climax, you won't be able to unsee it. By the by, if you are a fan of the shallower end of the cinematic gene pool, then 1000 Misspent Hours is well worth a visit. I don't always agree with his ratings. I think he's completely wrong about Starship Troopers, for instance, but the reviews themselves are always entertaining and packed with information. The website address is the obvious one, but just in case you can't find it, I've put it in the video interview for this review. So, that's Prisoners of the Lost Universe, a schlocky bit of TV-friendly, PG-rated trash, which will probably appeal only to those of you who, like me, have unreasonably fond childhood memories of the equally cheaply and ineptly made Hawk the Slayer. But for that small audience, it's a lot of silly fun. So next time, from a movie I like much more than it deserves to a movie I wanted to like much more than I actually did, 2004's Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. That review will be a little further off than usual, though. For the silly season, I'm taking a bit of a breather and reducing my Old Man Watches schedule to one video a week until the end of the year. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.